Yeah.
I made this for B-Sides Leeds. Chapter 1. Let them in. Okay, in 2014, a UK employee using Tor posted the names, addresses, bank accounts, details, national insurance numbers and salaries of more than 100,000 employees online. Police said, as an internal auditor, the accused had access to sensitive information. At his criminal trial, he was jailed for 8 years. Reason. Okay, what creates a rogue employee or a disgruntled employee? I think we probably here all know, but it's employees that feel that they're not required, they feel undervalued, frustrated, been in a position for a long time, no one listens to them, just generally annoyed and angry with the company. It can also be mental health issues. I was interested in what was, in this case, the sort of proven defining point of guilt. I wanted to know why they concluded. Now, I couldn't find much information. I suspect they found his laptop with all the details on it, including Tor, and they decided that was enough. I'm hoping that the case wasn't based on domain authentication. I have a lot of theories on domain authentication not being particularly secure and how pretty much anyone working in an environment that has a domain can compromise anyone's credentials. Okay, so for this talk, I started with Windows 10 host, which I think sort of replicates a lot of environments today. Windows 7's obviously gone end of life now. We should start seeing people going to sort of Windows 10 where they're not. I wanted AV on the box, so I used Defender. And I was interested to know what a standard user could just do on a domain. So I started with Inve. Now, Inve, if people don't know, is the PowerShell equivalent of Responder. And if you're not sure what Responder is, it's a tool that allows you to respond to broadcasts on a network. It doesn't have to be a domain. It can just be anywhere where there's network traffic. And what happens when it sees the broadcasts? It responds and it says, can you send me your authentication? So can you send me your username, your password hash, and your machine name or your domain name? You can take those hashes offline and you can reverse them. So if anyone's interested in downloading Inve, that's the address for it. Now, to run it, all the user has to do is fire up PowerShell and type import module Inve and import it. And then to run it, that's all they have to do. And that's where you can see. Now, some of you might notice that it says there administrator. Now, a standard user wouldn't have local admin rights or domain admin rights, but I'll get to that later. So when they run it without, they will see this. It's like a warning telling you that you're running it without elevated privilege mode. So a standard user will get that. Now, I was interested to know, when Inve first came out, people said that it's like Responder, but it doesn't have to be run as a local admin. And I was always very, very interested in this. And I've used it on quite a few tests myself, running it as a standard user. Now, what I've found is it's 50-50. Like where Responder will quite often snag you some hashes, Inve run as a standard user generally doesn't. But it can under the right circumstances. Now, this is what happens when you run it. It will start the DNS spoofer, the LMNR spoofer, the MBS spoofer, and also the HTTP spoof capture. That's the important one. If you're on a domain or on a network and someone starts sending broadcast HTTP traffic, Inve will respond to that and it will say, send me your credentials, and that's what you'll see. You'll get back the username, which is there, and you'll get back the password hash, which you can see there, and you also get the domain name or the computer name. That can obviously be taken offline and you can reverse it. Now, what you really want to be able to do, though, is to run it in an elevated or local administrative privileges. Now, I know what a lot of you will be thinking, these are standard users, so how can a standard user on your domain become local admin? And of course, I'm going to talk to you about that.
Ring the help desk.
Ring the help desk and ask them. They'll probably will do. In fact, environments where I've done red team, I have actually done that and they did do it for me. So it does happen. Right. I wanted to start off basic. So I looked at sticky keys. Now, if anyone's not aware of what sticky keys is here, I don't actually have time to chat about it, but it's probably one of the oldest exploits in Windows, and it will allow a standard user to tape the sethc application and rename it. Now, how you would do that is you'd have to mount the C drive, not as a Windows logged-in user. You'd have to use something like Kali or back in the day Backtrack, and you then you mount the C drive and you replace that sethc. You rename it to anything, and then you rename CMD to sethc, and then you reboot the machine, and you hit the shift key, I think 6 or 7 times, and it will start a CMD session before you've even logged in as a local admin. And what you then do is you add yourself as a local administrator. Now, it's a really, really, really old exploit. What I discovered was, doing this recently in my lab at home, I believe, and I haven't confirmed this yet, but I think Defender now goes, I spotted what you've done, and renames it, puts it back. Now, I did speak to someone about this internally at work and said, I think it does this. I will get around to testing it. But they just said, well, it's not a problem, because all you do is you'd start Windows then in safe mode, so Defender doesn't have a chance to kick in. So you could still do it. So in easy, that still today would be possibly the easiest way of making yourself a local admin. But what a lot of you people should be thinking, well, first I'm going to then discuss about how you go about doing it. So here you are with a Windows machine, and I'm booting off a USB drive. So all you do is you go to the boot options and you select removable devices, or USB or whatever they call it, and you boot into Kali. Now, an alternative to sticky keys would be this, where you collect the SAM, the security, and the system file. Now, what this gives you is the copy of the local computer hashes, which you can, you don't really have to, well, you can instantly collect the local administrative account hashes. You don't have to reverse them, because I've discussed this plenty of times before at talks. Microsoft will accept the default hash as authentication, and using certain tools, you can do what they call passing the hash and get authentication to boxes without actually reversing the password hash. But alternatively, and if, as you'll see on a lot of domains today, you have laps, which means every individual machine no longer has the same administrative accounts. You can no longer pass the hash in an environment that uses laps. But what you also find with this, and I only really discovered this recently, it also collects the cache credentials and these domain credentials. So from just doing this alone, you can possibly get lucky and actually get a domain administrative account that's a cache cred on the box. Alternatively, built into Kali, which came again from Backtrack, is change password. Now, this would allow the user to simply go onto the account they wished and delete the password. What you can also do with this is, at this point, elevate any account you like there to a local administrator as well. And that's how you run it. So you do change password, username, followed by the user you want, and the location of the SAM file. And that's what it looks like, and bang, done. So at this point, I've just discussed about 4 different ways of becoming a local administrator on a box. Now, this is me logging in. No password, because I've just deleted it. And then first thing I do is go straight to computer management, and I add a password purely for my own amusement, because I can. Now, what a lot of you will be thinking is, what's he going on about? Because firstly, the boot order and the BIOS are going to be locked. Well, yes, in a good environment, you would expect that, especially on laptops. Secondly, what you're also then going to be thinking is, and correctly, we've got BitLocker, or you've got encryption on the drive, so these cold boot attacks won't work. Yes. Now, what I discovered is, pretty much every environment I go into now, people will correctly encrypt their laptop hard drives. But what sort of, I'd say even 50%, probably more, people forget about the desktop machines. And I wanted to look into reasons why they have done this. Now, the conclusion I came up with yesterday while thinking about this more, laptops you give to an individual user. So you give them a BitLocker key. Now, if you have it in a shared environment like a desktop where multiple people might use it, you can't obviously, in a great or secure environment, if you'd hand that BitLocker key, you probably also have to hand that BitLocker key to multiple people. Now, Microsoft does have a solution around this, but it's quite a task to implement, and it involves putting certificates on with your DHCP server. And what happens is when that desktop boots up, it automatically, in essence, puts in the BitLocker key for you and logs the user directly into a domain prompt. But I've not yet seen an enterprise that's done this myself. And all I find is generally is they don't BitLocker the hard drives on the desktop. So if I was a user in an environment and I was disgruntled, and I found that my laptop was encrypted, I'd just go to desktop in a corner. And before anyone thinks, well, that's not very likely, on loads of social engineering jobs I've done where I've walked into a site, I've just walked up to machines as a last resort and done things like this. And even to the point where the BIOS is being locked, I've opened up a PC in the middle of an office and changed the boot order on the motherboard and then restarted the machine just to bypass the BIOS logs. So this is all very easy to do. Now, if all that fails, you have to go more back to kind of traditional Privesk sort of approaches. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Privesk. I don't have much time, and there's lots of people who are better at Privesk than me, but I definitely have some things that I do really like to do. This is one of them, built into Windows, FindString. It's amazing. Basically, you just type FindString, and you say what keyword you want. Here I've done password, and you say which sort of documents you'd be interested in looking for, and it will then go off and search those documents for that defined set word. And what I wanted to do is I like to do is show people. So here I am as a standard user. Is that starting?
It's on the desktop. TXT.
It's what, sorry? Oh, there you go. Sorry. Right. you can't see it very well here, but what I've done is I've mounted the DC. Now, a standard user by default in an average domain can normally access the DC. So I've mounted that, and I'm running find string, and hit go, and there we go. So it's instantly found a file called notes.txt, and if we look inside it, there is a username called Jimmy Gob, and it's yep1 is the password. Now, some people might be thinking that's unlikely. Generally, when I do an offensive engagement, first thing I do when I get credentials is start having a sniff around the network. I'll go to the DC, I'll do searches for files with keywords in, and really commonly I find accounts that are usable. Quite often there are even domain admins or local admins. So thank you for that aeroplane going past me at the moment. So any standard user can do that. Right, you can also then get into more traditional approaches of looking for missing patches on devices. And there's a one-liner that will do it, and it shows you all the patches that are on there. You can take that off air, and then you can see if there's any exploits that correlate to any of the missing patches. That's a bit messy, and I generally think of that as a capture the flag situation, but you can do it. So we're finally running as administrator or local administrator on the device, and we run Inve again. So what have we got that's different? We've finally got the immortal and the one I love, the SMB capture. So SMB traffic, I should explain to people who don't know, in a network is very common. Pretty much that's how Windows file share works. So if you have a statically defined share system like Z drive or Z drive or F drive, call it whatever you like on your machine, when you first log in, Windows will try and access that, and it'll make an SMB request out. Now, if you're sitting there with your Inve or responder, you'll go, yep, I'm here, send me your credentials, you get or But let's make this better, because in Windows 10, I'm starting to notice environments in Windows 10, they're getting less chatty, and I'm sort of noticing you're plugging in or you're compromising a box and you're running Inve on it remotely. You're just seeing less traffic generally. So my colleague, about 2 years ago, he's actually a friend of mine, he's no longer a colleague, but he's a friend of mine, released on our blog a blog post about SCF files. Now, this is an SCF file. What it is you put an SMB request into it. As you can see there, it's the IP address of your Inve or your responder box. And you then name it 1 or A, so it's at the very top of a share. Now, any Windows machine, every time you browse to that share, Windows will automatically see that SCF file and trigger. And it'll trigger by going, oh, there's an SMB request in there. Without you being prompted or even known, it'll send the hashes back to your responder or Inve. So whenever we do an engagement, we always litter around these SCF files. Obviously, you clean them up afterwards. But during an engagement, you do it, and all of a sudden, you're back to raining hashes. So when it fails, and it always does fail on pretty much every test. Now, I've discussed throughout the years many ways of snagging credentials, and I've generally always talked about them as SMB. So I'm very into sort of, injecting SMB into emails, into index files of websites, so it just triggers automatically when you browse it. I'm pretty much interested in shoving SMBs absolutely everywhere. So, yeah, we can do it. And I wanted to give you a quick example of how I do an SMB exploit. Now, I'm very interested, and I'll get onto this a little bit later as well, I'm very interested in error messages and general prompts that you get. So that's an Office 365 prompt there that I got in Excel recently. And it's basically saying, can you verify your subscription? So instantly I thought, I'll take that, fire up responder, and drop it into Excel, and let's exploit this. So when you click it now, it no longer takes you to prompt your creds. What it does is, you'll see, automatically sends me a hash over SMB. So what did I do there? What was the magic? I took the error message that was legitimate, I copied it, and I put it into MS Paint, I made it the right size, and dropped it into Excel, made that hyperlink and put it as an SMB request. Very quick notes on Office. I've noticed Excel allows you to instantly click a hyperlink without any prompt for asking for anything. You just click it, it will automatically trigger. Word, you need to do Control and click. And PowerPoint needs to be in presenter mode for a hyperlink to work. So I like to know these sort of things when I'm on a test, because if I'm going to send something into a target, I like to know that it will just trigger without any prompt or as little prompt as possible. So some of you will be thinking, stop talking about SMB. And you're right. Firewalling. 5 years ago, no one had any outbound firewall rules really at all. I used to go against network companies and spank them with this. The problem is today, people have started, it's not a problem, it's positive, people have started to filter the outbound traffic as well. So SMB is now filtered outbound as well. So if you send this into someone, it just slams against their firewall. Now, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I did do a talk and I said, let's just change SMB and make it HTTP, because most people aren't going to block HTTP outbound. And I got off stage and someone said to me that just doesn't work. So it was a bit of an embarrassing talk I did. But the key reason why it didn't work is because when you do it over HTTP, you get this, you get a prompt. Now, you could argue that it does work. Because what happens is if you replace the SMB request of HTTP on a Windows machine, they get a prompt for credentials. They put the credentials in, you get the hashes back. But you could argue, well, that's just a credential harvester. And at which point you might as well just clone a website. And I agree with that. So I never really used this on a real engagement, but it was always a fallback. But I was interested, and for years I've been thinking about, what if you could do it without a prompt? Well, you can. And I've released some ghetto code. On my GitHub page, my exploit, there's this bash script, and it takes your Word document, your clean Word document. I apologise, no one can see this here, but you should be able to see it later if anyone's interested on YouTube. And all you have to do is you add your IP address, and you'll see what it does in a minute. So here I am. I'm adding my IP address to it. And I'm going to run the script. And what it does is it prompts you for the location of your Word document, your clean Word document that you want to use as your template. And that could be anything. And it unzips it. And in essence, it injects all of that code there, which you can see yourself if you have a look at it. And then it rezips it up and saves it as a docx, which is what it's done there. So it's done it there, it's unzipped it, it's added it, and it's resaved as a docx. So now it's just a case of taking what I call their dirty file and moving it over to your target. Right, so at this point, I'm going to fire up Inveil, I'm going to fire up Responder. And here we are back on the target machine. They've received that, they've downloaded it from some site, and they're opening it. Now, there you go, we've got a hash. So, when I go back to Windows Box here, that prompt there is because I'm using a trial copy of Windows. What you see there, there's no other prompt for credentials. No credentials are being put in manually. What they are is it's just automatically sending the credentials, and now Responder is intercepting them as a HTTP request. So, finally, while the firewall's blocked me, I'm finally back to being this person. I can get past firewalls again. Now, I did discuss earlier about the fact that I love error messages. So here's something that's a little bit basic, but I wanted to show you. So using Cobalt as a C2, we go here to the Windows target and we open up this. Now, what this is here, it's saying that the PowerPoint document has basically corrupted and you need to re-download it. So I've changed that to a HTA, and when they go to re-download it now, they see nothing. Now, what I would do if I was using this on an engagement, I'd have made that screen look a little bit nicer, and I'd have then had a redirect to a legitimate PowerPoint document. So they'd have just seen nothing. They'd have clicked it and got a PowerPoint document. They'd have felt that was correct. What we've got here, though, as you can see, is a reverse connection. So we now control that machine remotely. Right, the big bad wolf. So, generally from an insider's malicious point of view, and also from a red team engagement, it's getting harder. And I didn't think it really was until it really hit me probably about a year ago. It's getting a lot harder. EDR is starting to kill everything. Now, if you're not aware of what EDR is, this is what EDR is. It's a software agent installed on the host system. If you're interested in reading about EDR, here's one such product here you can read about. Now, the basics of EDR. Anything abnormal, EDR will alert on. Here's a screenshot of an example of a central solution which takes alerts in. Now, the only saving grace presently from a red team perspective is during a 7-day period, that's got 494 central alerts going into it. 494,000 alerts are going into it over a 7-day period. And apparently it's down 62,000 was the week before. So obviously doing some tuning, but they've still got thousands of alerts. Now, presently we can just sort of sneak in amongst it. But running CMD, running PowerShell, it will alert. Is PowerShell dead? A lot of people are saying it is. A lot of people are saying it's not. It's not completely dead yet, but on more mature environments, you just can't use it really anymore. Okay, this is a weird one. I did a test recently. A client said to me, can you test our ADR solution? And I'm not kidding. Just firing up MS Paint actually did trigger an alert. I have no idea why, but it did. But I kind of came to this conclusion with ADR at the moment, in some environments. A lot of you might disagree, but I think basically if the wind blows or the sun shines on a laptop, if someone puts a kettle on, there's a good chance EDR is probably going to trigger. That is what I see EDR as. So, we caused this, in essence. We started to use tools that are used generally by SOCs, blue teams, and we used them against them. We started to use PowerShell, we started to use living off the land, we started to use all these kind of tools that they've been using for a long time. It's not surprising that firstly they're going to possibly be annoyed, but also they're going to figure out ways of defending against it very, very rapidly. Now, presently, as it stands, the majority of solutions cause so much noise, as I said earlier, we can still sneak past. But it's getting really, really hard, which is a positive thing. So, as I always like to end, a very quick overview, how to get around EDR. So, firstly, I like to do this on a test. Avoid it like the plague. Generally, stay away from it if I can. This is how I consider EDR. I'm now going to go to this, which is going to surprise people, because a lot of people think of where we would attack normally. We'd go straight for the users. People say incorrectly, weakest part of the link and all that, which I've said for years is wrong. But now, we won't go for that. We'll generally go straight to your servers, because what I've found is on some environments, not all, but they'll stick EDR on their advanced sort of solutions on all of the laptops, all the desktops, all where the users touch. They're generally a bit afraid to stick it on their servers. This could be because they don't want to interrupt with what it does. They don't want to potentially risk it or slow it down. I don't know, but I find that generally they're less protected now. So I started thinking, can I make a quick slide just to portray to everyone how I see server land compared to desk land where we used to attack? This is it. So there's your desk land now, or desktops, which we avoid like the plague, and that's what server land looks like. So how do we go from foothold to server land? Well, there's lots of ways to do this. Basically, if you have credentials and you don't want to trigger EDR, possibly the best way to do it is, I find, is to use your own machine, which you obviously can't do from a remote perspective. But if you have compromised someone's machine, probably try and escalate to local admin rights as soon as you can, and then install some sort of virtualization on their machine, and then run a Windows issue inside of that, and then add that to the domain. So any standard user by default, I've said this many times before, can add up to 10 machines to a Windows domain. They can't take them off a domain, which makes sense because otherwise they could take your DCs off. But the reality is, it's dangerous. Yeah, and I'm showing you here, standard user is adding a machine to a domain. So why would you want to do this? Well, you've got a machine on their network that we can use to completely map out their network and exploit with nothing on at all. No protection, no AV, no EDR solution, absolutely nothing. We can go back to using any tool we like. We can make as much noise on this machine as we like. Enumeration. The only way they will spot us then is when we start enumerating the other machines. But this is a damn sight less noisy a way of doing it. Now, a lot of you will be thinking, can adding a machine... Well, yes, you'll be thinking that. So adding a machine to the domain is likely to trigger an alert. Yes, but I just discussed earlier, if someone's getting 70 to 100,000 alerts a week, they may not be spotting stuff like this. Adding machines to domains, I've done quite a few tests, and I've found people haven't generally spotted it. So, right, I want to leave you with this high note, because I always like to end on a positive. So here we have a kiosk environment, which a lot of environments use kiosk environments. Generally, they give you access to IE. So this is a replication of a job we did recently. So first thing we'll do is browse to our own site. Now I'm using my lab environment to replicate it. So obviously it's a 192 address instead of a real domain. But at this point, I'm going to download a copy of a bat file which starts up FTP. Now CMD was hidden. It wasn't hidden very well, as we're about to see here. So by starting FTP, you then try and fire up CMD. And boom, there we go. So we've instantly got access to CMD on this kiosk machine. Now, from that point, I want to get straight to PowerShell. So simply type PowerShell, and there you go, straight into PowerShell. So what am I going to do now? Well, I'm going to drop a PowerShell one-liner if I can. And here I'm doing what's called curb roasting. Now, curb roasting makes any standard domain user can do is it makes a request to the domain controller. It asks the domain controller for a copy of all the service accounts with their correlating password hashes. Service accounts can typically belong to an administrative group, if not the domain administrative group. And thirdly, fourthly, fifthly, lastly, their passwords are generally weak. So you generally find something like the password is just the username. And the reason for this is because service accounts can commonly have been set up at the very start of the domain being built, and they're set to never expire, the passwords. They've never thought about changing it. So just from accessing a kiosk, 5 minutes later, we're now domain admin. So, and there we go. I'm just going to very quickly show you my account in my lab at home. I call it DA because it's a DA. Right. I work for Pentest Partners, and I might exploit 2600 on Twitter. Thank you very much.